All right, scientific methods. We talk about research for the first time in this course. So I know you're all excited. I don't want to wait on this title slide to keep your excitement back or anything. But what I want you to think about is what we're going to talk about in this chapter and then further chapters is how hard it is to actually measure something that people feel, right? So how do you quantify a feeling? Sounds like a really bad emo song. How do you quantify a feeling? And how do you quantify interactions, right? If you ever tried to, and I'm sure you have, had a conversation with somebody and then later on you replay that conversation in your mind, or you replay it while you're in the shower or wherever, driving your car, and you're thinking, okay, did that go well? What do they mean by this? You're essentially trying to make sense or apply logic to something that is subjective and kind of in many ways defies logic. So we're going to talk about how we actually try and put a number on the way people feel, interact, believe. You get the idea. So some problems here, and I included, I wish the screen actually didn't cut off a lot of this. The problem is human beings have very, very unusual social interactions, right? It's very difficult to examine them, particularly as they happen, right? So think of all the awkward exchanges you've ever had with somebody, right? We even the most socially adept people are awkward, right? And if you take just a moment to think of the most awkward interaction you've ever had, you're probably cringing right now as I speak. I'm thinking of the most awkward interactions I've had, and those interactions have left me very uncomfortable, right? Even now thinking about it, I'm like, I can't believe I said that or whatever. Anyway, like when the waiter comes to your table and says, how's your meal? And you say, thank you, right? And you're like, oh, I meant to say good, delicious, whatever. Anyway, you get the idea. And of course, simulating them too is going to be difficult. So if we're trying to replicate them for research, when you say, okay, I want you to pretend that you two are friends and interact like friends would, that's contrived. That's never going to feel natural or authentic, right? So when we try and do research, we can't just simulate these social interactions because they're very organic and very dynamic, right? And of course, observing them creates other confounds, creates other complications. So are we going to record social interactions and then discuss them later? Are we going to stand at a distance? Or are we going to use a video recorder? How are we actually going to record these? And then how do we judge them subjectively? Is it possible to judge them subjectively, right? And then also to self-report. So if you ask somebody, hey, how did that interaction go? It's extraordinarily biased and creates additional confounds, right? So, if you go on a blind date with somebody, you might think, oh my gosh, I never ever want to see that person again. They are so rude or they're so obnoxious or whatever. And then they might tell their best friend, man, I think she really likes me. That went really, really well. I'm so pleased. I can't wait to have a second date, right? Those are self-reports of social interactions and two very different self-reports with the same interaction. And I include here some pictures of some government type officials here. So former President Barack Obama, former President George Bush, Condoleezza Rice, Vladimir Putin, Justin Trudeau of Canada. All of these are interactions where people are just trying to do something simple, like a handshake or a greeting, and they are awkward. That top right one between former President Bush and Condoleezza Rice is cringeworthy. I mean, what the heck is that? It looks like he's a fish trying to bite her nose or something. I have no idea, right? So anyway, humans, we're just awkward. We're just awkward. And so how do you measure people? How do you measure their interactions? How do you account for the awkwardness? You see the problem. So what's the solution? Oh, and it cut my picture off. At the bottom it says, I'm a researcher. So if you've watched The Simpsons, that's Ralph Wiggum there. Anyway, the problem is, of course, we have to be very strategic. The solution is that we are purposeful and strategic. We design things with an attention to detail, and we also have to notice where it says purposeful. We have to anticipate problems. We have to anticipate confounds. We have to anticipate difficulties before they even really happen, right? So the research has to be designed not thinking of the moment, but thinking of the future, okay? And as it says, effortful elimination of as many confounds as possible. Please, for your notes, indicate that you can never fully eliminate confounds. You can never fully eliminate confounds in research. You can only strive to reduce them, okay? And you could parallel that with awkwardness, social awkwardness. You could be a very socially adept person, very comfortable with people, very much an extrovert, and then still have very awkward social interactions or awkward social moments, right? You can never eliminate them. You can just reduce them. We want to make sure our data analysis is very thorough. We'll talk more about that in a second in terms of quantitative or qualitative analysis. And we want to make sure that we know what we're looking for, and we also want to make sure we're unbiased in how we examine them. Going along with that idea of a lack of bias, we want to make sure we have reasonable conclusions. If you had no experience with people, you'd never seen a person in your life, and you watched two males interact, and it was very awkward, right? You might be inclined to be like, oh, well, obviously all males are awkward all the time, based on just that observation of just that interaction between just those two people, right? That's not a reasonable conclusion. We want to keep in mind that what we are observing is only a fraction of what actually takes place. So keep our conclusions reasonable and, once again, unbiased. You hear me use that word a lot. We're trying to reduce bias as much as possible, so deliberately unbiased. And then this last one, and maybe this is just me getting preachy, but this is actually just a good way to lead your life, too. Openness to alternative explanations. And I hate reading from my slides, but I want to use those exact words when I'm talking about this. Just because the data indicates A, it might indicate A thoroughly. The conclusion A is correct, right? You have to be open to the idea that B might also be correct, or C has some correctness in it, right? Alternative explanations. To kind of draw this as a parallel, I'm Christian. I've been Christian my whole life. I cannot foresee a part of my life that would ever not be Christian. But I am open to other perspectives within Christianity and outside of Christianity, right? Doesn't mean that they are the explanations for me or the religions for me, but I'm open to them because they are alternative explanations for the prime reality of life, right? That's the idea, and you want to make sure you really adhere to that in research. Do not do research just to confirm what you already believe. As Ralph Wiggum is doing there, he's Googling what I want to be true, and you can find anything out there that will confirm what you want to be true, okay? So we want to make sure research is not there to confirm what we believe so much as help us discover the truth in general. So a question, and I'm gonna be kind of facetious about a lot of this, but how do we measure love? Let's look at a specific example with regard to quantifying social interactions. How do you scientifically measure love? Right? It's difficult, and I've included some of them are quite trite, but some of them are quite good. So some of the things you might see in movies that characterize romantic love. So top middle, I've got Romeo and Juliet. Did my heart know love till now? Oh, did my heart love till now? Forswear its sight, for I never saw true beauty till this night. That is young Romeo proclaiming his love for young Juliet. Notice I said young twice because I believe they're both 13 or 14 when that story takes place, right? Is that love? No. That is attraction. That is lust. We'll talk more about that in, I think, chapter 7. But no, not love, right? And so here's some more like, things you might see on someone's Facebook, or probably not Instagram, but Facebook for sure. I fell in love with you because of the million things that you never knew you were doing. Ugh. Gag me with a spoon, man. That's just weak. Forever is a long time, but I wouldn't mind spending it by your side. Oh my gosh. Who even says these things? I've been in love with my wife for almost 20 years now. I don't think I've ever said something so stupid as that, right? I'm much more me when I'm with you. Some people search their whole lives to find what I found in you, and I can't keep calm because I'm in love with you. Ugh. Ugh. If you've seen Star Wars, especially the prequels, you'll understand that writing about love is very, very difficult. George Lucas fell flat on his face writing about love in the first 3 episodes of Star Wars, as demonstrated by the love story between Anakin and Padme. Han Solo and Leia was a bit of a better love story, but anyway. The point I'm getting to with all this is even trying to create a subjective definition of love is difficult because it varies so much, let alone trying to create an objective, operational, measurable definition of love. All right? So let's start with the research question. We'll start with the research question is, how do two people fall in love with each other? What predicts love, right? What is it that is the foundational aspects for romantic love to develop? We'll start there, okay? Oops, sorry, I put transitions in these slides and I forgot. There we go. All right, so conceptualization. How do we conceptualize the idea of love, right? So when you're forming an unbiased hypothesis, how do you decide, okay, how do two people come to love each other, right? And the second question, of course, is what assumptions do we make about love? We make all sorts of assumptions about love based on what we know of love, what we've experienced of love, what we've seen modeled for love, even what we see in the media. Right? So, for example, on the far left here, I've got the TV show, which I don't even think is on TV anymore, Sister Wives, which I invite you to Google, because if you haven't seen it, it is fascinating. Bizarre, but fascinating. Right? In this case, they're talking about a polyamorous or polygamous marriage, right? Where there's one husband and 4 wives, which I'm not even going to start making the bad jokes. But anyway, is that love? Does that count as love? Right? Romeo and Juliet, I've already referenced as... it's pitched as the greatest love story ever told, which I would say, no, how about the Bible, right? But that aside, I mean, obviously the way God loves us is different than the way that we love people romantically, But I still argue that Romeo and Juliet is not the greatest love story ever told, potentially the greatest infatuation story ever told, but we'll get to that. Sorry, I get a little preachy about it. With the love too, for example, in that third picture on the bottom there, when we talk about love, do we strictly think of heterosexual love, right, or heteroromantic love? Do we include homosexual marriages or homosexual relationships when we think about love? I would argue that from a research point of view, absolutely, we should consider that. Research does not get, or research or science should not be caught up on social norms or judgments of ethics or propriety, regardless of how you feel about homosexual relationships. As a researcher, it is a type of relationship, and you should examine it objectively and unbiased, right? And then the far right, of course, if you've not seen the Disney movie Up, make sure you see at least the first 3 minutes, because the love story told in the first 3 minutes is arguably the greatest love story told on film. And I know it sounds like I'm being ridiculous, but watch it, and if you don't get emotional, let me know, because you probably should, okay? But all of these, what I'm saying is with all these are all ways that we conceptualize of love because we've seen it before, right? Even in that picture on the left there, that is my dog, that black dog is mine, and then the tan dog is my in-law's dog. He loves her. That's him sharing that cage with her. Both of them are too big to share that cage. But he loves that dog. And he actually, when she sleeps, he'll go over and sit next to her and guard her and not sleep because he adores that dog, right? Is that love, right? When we think of love, we typically think of humans love it, not animals love it, right? So, of course, what do we have to consider? What is love? And your mind, hopefully your mind is going where my mind is and saying, baby, don't hurt me, right? But what do we talk about? When we conceptualize love, we have to be clear. Are we talking about between two people? Right? Or two animals? Are we talking about two people of the opposite sex? So are we talking about heteroromantic situations, right? Or heterosexual relationships? Are we actually looking at love alone? Or are we including lust, infatuation, idealization, things like this, right? And then also, how long is a relationship, right? Do you believe in love at first sight? Which is such a novel idea. I think it's fascinating. I don't know that I've felt that, but, you know, are we including that, right? So, can you say that two people have been in love because they've known each other for 20 seconds, right? Or they knew they were in love from the very beginning? That's something you want to decide when you're designing this research. You have to set up the parameters for what counts as love, and therefore the parameters for what doesn't count as love, right? So already you're faced with a dilemma. How do you cut this in a way that's going to be clear in your research? So let me be clear, let me back up. This is conceptualization. We're basically trying to form a definition for love, right? Operationalization is how we're going to measure what we have just defined, right? Once we have defined it, now we have to find a way to measure it accurately, right? So how do you measure love, right? What are you going to ask these participants? Do you ask them how long the relationship has been? How often do you think of that person? Who gets to respond, right? So are you asking both people in the relationship? If you're only looking at married couples, do you only ask the husband? Do you only ask the wife? Do you ask both people, right? There's so many questions, right? Do you ask the same question to both people? Do you compare their responses? When you look at quantifying it, what's the best way to put a number on love? And I've asked students this in class, and they'll say, oh, you know, how many times a day you text that person? Okay, but my wife and I are kind of old, so we actually do more calling than texting, right? How much money, I love this, how much money you spend on that person, right? Well, that could vary a lot depending on your SES and your priorities. My wife and I have 4 kids, so I undoubtedly spend more money on my kids than I spend on my wife. So does that mean I love them more than I love her? Other students will say how often the person has intercourse with that individual. Well, if you look at old people, right? My grandparents are in their 80s, and not to get too blue about it, I don't know if they actually engage in physical love anymore, right? But does that mean they love each other any less, right? I mean, I've seen old people where I think, man, that's what love looks like, right? And that's absent of a largely physical relationship, right? How do any of these capture love at all? And are they accurate? My heart rate goes up when I see my wife. That's a good biofeedback measure, and that's quantifiable, right? But my heart rate also goes up when I see my children for very different reasons. My heart rate goes up when I see my car because I love my car, right? All of these are possible ways to quantify it, but as a researcher, you have to decide which ones will be best for the researcher designing and which ones are the most viable ways of measuring the conceptualization of love that you've already written, okay? At the moment, I feel like you're probably like, well, I'm just not going to research anything because it seems too complicated and I hate it. That's the nature of social psychology. That's what we're trying to do, is put numbers and instrumentation and measurement on things that are extraordinarily difficult to measure so that we can better understand humans and the way we interact.